I don't know you.
He looked straight at his wife of 2 years, the mother of his unborn child, the only person in the room who actually loved him, and told her he had no idea who she was. The monitors beeped. His family exhaled. And Jae Kang decided, in that exact moment, that the most loving thing he could ever do for Mandy was to break her heart completely. Before we begin, if you love dramatic stories where the wrong people finally get exactly what they deserve, hit that like button and subscribe right now. Because this family thought they'd won. They hadn't even seen the opening move yet. Don't miss a single chapter. Let's get into it. The morning Jae Kang nearly died started like every other morning in the Kang household, with someone lying about something. His mother called at 7 to remind him that the quarterly board meeting had been rescheduled, which was true, and that the family expected him to attend without complications, which was code for without Mandy. His brother Tae-jun sent a cheerful text asking if Jae had reviewed the new asset restructuring proposal, which Jae had reviewed, and which had made him very, very quiet for a long time. His aunt Soo-yeon emailed a link to an article titled The Legal Complexities of Spousal Inheritance in Multinational Conglomerates, with no accompanying message, because Soo-yeon was a retired judge who believed subtlety was a gift she gave to people who didn't deserve it. Jae read all 3 communications over coffee while Mandy sat across the breakfast table in his old university sweatshirt, annotating structural load calculations on her tablet and eating toast without looking up. She had a habit of doing 17 things simultaneously and making all of them look effortless. It was one of the first things he had loved about her. It was also currently the thing making it hardest to do what he was about to do. "You're staring," she said, without lifting her eyes from the screen. "I'm admiring. You're brooding. There's a difference. Your left eyebrow does a thing." He smiled and said nothing. She finally looked up, and for a moment the calculations and the toast and the carefully managed distance between the life they had built together and the family that despised it all collapsed into something much simpler. She was 29 weeks pregnant, composed as architecture, and entirely too perceptive for his comfort. "Jae, everything's fine." She studied him the way she studied buildings, looking not at the surface but at what the surface was hiding. Then she went back to her tablet because Mandy Osei had learned in 11 months of Kang family dinners that pressing Jae before he was ready produced nothing useful. She would wait. She was extraordinarily good at waiting. What she didn't know, what no one except Jae and 3 other people on the planet knew, was that 3 nights earlier, Jae had discovered a folder on his father's private server that had rearranged every assumption he'd ever made about his own family. Forged transfer agreements, backdated resolutions, a commissioned legal opinion concluding that Jae's shares could be redirected if he were incapacitated, under a clause so obscure it read like something written specifically to be used exactly once. And then below all of it, an email chain. Subject line: handle the breaks. His brother's name. His own logistics manager. A date 2 weeks away. Jae had sat in his father's study for 40 minutes without moving. Not because he was afraid, though a reasonable man would have been, but because he was doing something far more dangerous than panicking. He was thinking. He had printed everything, locked it away, gone to bed. He had spent 2 weeks quietly replacing his brake fluid that morning with a modified compound that would reduce stopping power without eliminating it entirely. Enough to cause a crash that looked catastrophic, survivable, if you knew exactly how to position yourself, which Jae did, because he had been the kind of child who read engineering manuals for entertainment and had married a structural engineer for reasons that were romantic and also, it turned out, occasionally practical. The crash happened at 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. He walked away with bruised ribs and a cut above his left eyebrow. The paramedics were alarmed. His family arrived at the hospital looking concerned in the specific way of people who had expected worse and were recalibrating. And then the attending physician, bless his thorough and unknowing soul, mentioned that patients in Jae's condition sometimes experience temporary memory disruption. Jae watched Taejun's shoulders fall exactly half an inch with relief. He closed his eyes. He made the decision. When he opened them and looked at Mandy, her face wet, her hand reaching for his, her eyes carrying every terrified prayer she had said in the ambulance, he made himself look through her like glass. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "Have we met?" The sound she made was very small. It was the worst sound he had ever heard. It would live in him for the rest of his life, pressed flat between the pages of every choice he had made that led to this room. His mother placed a hand over her own chest in what appeared to be grief and was almost certainly relief. Taejun bowed his head with tremendous solemnity. Soo-yeon folded her hands and said nothing because she was already thinking about lawyers. None of them noticed that Jae's left eyebrow wasn't doing anything at all. He had practiced in the mirror for a week, He was a man who, when he committed to something, committed entirely. The monitors beeped. The family exhaled. And somewhere in the controlled stillness behind Jae Kang's empty eyes, the most expensive trap in Korean corporate history had just been set. If you think what this family did to Mandy is one of the coldest betrayals you've ever seen, drop a comment below and tell me, could you have kept a straight face? Like and subscribe if you're riding with Mandy, because only someone truly heartless would side with this family. There is a particular kind of cruelty that wears good manners like a tailored suit, and the Kang family wore theirs impeccably. The day Jae was discharged from the hospital, Madam Kang arrived with fresh flowers, a private nursing team, and a Korean-speaking caretaker named Mrs. Oh, who was 62, efficient, and stationed in the guest wing of Jae and Mandy's home with the quiet permanence of someone who had not come to visit but to occupy. She reorganized the kitchen within 48 hours. She prepared Jae's meals according to his mother's instructions. She greeted Mandy each morning with a polite bow and conversations conducted entirely in Korean, which Madam Kang had helpfully assured everyone was simply more comfortable for Jae's recovery. Mandy, who held 2 engineering degrees and had once calmly redirected a construction crew mid-collapse, stood in her own kitchen on the 3rd morning and watched Mrs. O rearrange her spice rack with the focused energy of a woman performing an exorcism. She said nothing. She was 29 weeks pregnant, her husband didn't know her name, and her mother-in-law had effectively installed a surveillance system that cooked. This was not the time for confrontation, this was the time for observation. Mandy had always understood that the most useful thing a person could do in a hostile environment was resist the urge to announce themselves. So she watched. She watched Taejun arrive every afternoon with folders he described as just keeping Jae current, sliding documents across the bedside table, while Jae nodded along with the cooperative blankness of a man whose frontal lobe had reportedly taken a holiday. She watched him guide Jae's hand towards signature lines with the gentle insistence of someone helping a toddler hold a crayon, except the crayon was a pen, and the drawing was a 17-page asset reclassification agreement. She watched Soo-yeon arrive on the 5th day with a family attorney named Mr. Beck, who had the energy of a man who had spent 40 years doing things that were technically legal and emotionally indefensible. They sat with Jae for 2 hours. When they emerged, Soo-yeon was smiling, which on her face looked approximately the same as a building inspector marking a structure for demolition. "He's doing remarkably well," she told Mandy in the hallway in English, which she only used when she wanted to make sure Mandy understood something perfectly. "The doctors are very encouraged. We're all just focused on what's best for Jae right now." "Of course," Mandy said, "and for the family, naturally." They regarded each other across the hallway with the mutual recognition of 2 people who had never once been fooled by the other and had simply agreed, for an extended period, to behave as though they had. Mandy went back to the bedroom. Jae was sitting up against the pillows, face arranged in that careful blankness, eyes tracking the ceiling. She sat on the edge of the bed and looked at him for a long moment. This man she had married on a rooftop in Singapore in front of 11 people and her cousin's slightly malfunctioning Bluetooth speaker. This man who had once driven 40 minutes in Seoul traffic to find her the specific brand of Ghanaian pepper sauce she'd mentioned once in passing. This man whose left eyebrow currently wasn't doing the thing it always did when he was hiding something. She filed that away like a load-bearing observation and said nothing. "Do you need anything?" she asked quietly. He looked at her with empty eyes. "I'm fine, thank you." Formal, polite. The voice of a man speaking to a stranger he felt mildly sorry for. She nodded and left the room. In the hallway, she pressed her back against the wall and breathed very slowly, one hand resting on the curve of her stomach where their daughter had been turning slow, unhurried circles all morning, completely unbothered by the collapse of the surrounding circumstances. Mandy found this both unreasonable and deeply comforting. She pulled out her phone and opened the Notes app. She began writing down everything she'd observed. Taejun's folders, Mr. Baek's visit, the specific documents she'd glimpsed over Jae's shoulder before Taejun angled them away, the dates, the names, the particular quality of Soo-yeon's smile. Mandy Osei had built her career on understanding exactly how much pressure a structure could absorb before it failed. She knew better than anyone that the most dangerous moment in any collapse wasn't when things started falling. It was the moment right before, when everything looked completely fine. She kept writing. The thing about performing helplessness is that it requires a specific kind of discipline most people underestimate, because the hardest part isn't pretending you don't remember. The hardest part is watching people you once respected reveal, with stunning enthusiasm, exactly who they are when they believe no one capable is watching. Jae was finding it educational. By the 2nd week, the family had stopped being careful. This was the predictable arc of overconfidence. It started with caution, loosened into comfort, and eventually became something resembling a victory lap taken several weeks before the race had actually ended. Tae-jun now spoke freely on phone calls in the hallway outside Jae's room, apparently having concluded that a man with memory loss also lost the ability to hear through walls, which said more about Tae-jun's understanding of neurology than Jae cared to examine. He learned a great deal from those phone calls. The offshore restructuring was further along than Jae had realized. 3 international subsidiaries had already been quietly re-registered under a holding company that Tae-jun had incorporated 18 months ago. 18 months. Which meant this plan had been assembled while Tae-jun was shaking Mandy's hand at their wedding reception and complimenting her on the ceremony. Jae filed this information under the category he had mentally labeled things that would have destroyed me if I'd found out before I was ready and moved on. He had his own calls to make. Attorney Park Hyun-woo arrived at the hospital on day 9 disguised at Jae's instruction as a private rehabilitation consultant. He was a small, precise man who wore the same style of dark suit in every season and communicated primarily through documents and the occasional raised eyebrow. He had been Jae's personal attorney for 6 years, operated from an office so discreet it had no signage, and had once kept a 9-figure merger completely confidential for 8 months, including from his own wife, which his wife maintained was the actual reason they had eventually divorced, and which Park maintained was a matter of professional principle. Both things were probably true. He sat beside Jae's bed with a rehabilitation worksheet as cover and spoke in a murmur so controlled it barely disturbed the air. "The trust structure is ready," Park said, eyes on the worksheet. Hyun-sik completed the offshore consolidation this morning. Lim finished the audit trail. Everything routes through the spousal protection instrument, irreversible without Mrs. Kang's personal biometric authorization. The voting rights? Transferred. Locked. The only way to reverse it requires her signature, her fingerprint, and a 30-day cooling period that cannot be waived by any court in 3 jurisdictions. Park made a small note on the worksheet that said absolutely nothing about any of this. "Your brother filed 2 new documents with Mr. Beck yesterday." "I know, I signed them." Park's eyebrow moved approximately 2 millimeters, which for him constituted an expression of profound alarm. "They reclassify 40% of your direct holdings as family trust assets, revocable by majority family vote," Jae said, "which is exactly what I needed them to file." A pause. "Because now they're on record," Park said slowly. "Because now they're on record," Jae confirmed. "Forged authorization, fraudulent reclassification, filed with the government registry, signed by a man they themselves argued was mentally incapacitated." He smiled at the ceiling. "I want to send Tae-jun a fruit basket. This is genuinely the most helpful thing he's ever done for me." Park looked at him for a moment with the expression of a man who had spent his career believing he was the most strategically composed person in any given room, and was quietly revising that assessment. "There is one complication," Park said. "Mandy. She has been making notes, detailed ones. My contact in the house observed her documenting visitor names, document types, timestamps. She cross-referenced Tae-jun's holding company through a public registry search 4 days ago." He paused. "She found it." Jae was quiet for a moment. "Of course she did," he said. "It came out softer than he intended. She hasn't moved on the information, no calls to attorneys, no contact with the board. She's waiting." Jae closed his eyes briefly. Mandy was 29 weeks pregnant, living in her own home like a guest, eating meals prepared according to his mother's instructions, being smiled at in Korean, and she had still found the holding company. She had found it, documented it, and said nothing. Because she was waiting the way she always waited, building her case one observation at a time, with the patience of someone who understood that a structure didn't need to be demolished all at once. It only needed the right pressure applied to the right point. He had married an extraordinary woman. He was currently torturing her. These 2 facts sat in his chest simultaneously every hour of every day, and there was nothing he could do about either of them until the work was finished. "Tell Lim to accelerate the subsidiary filings," Jae said. "I want everything completed before the board meeting. That gives us 19 days. Then we have 19 days." Park stood, tucked the rehabilitation worksheet under his arm, and moved toward the door with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had somewhere very important to be and would never tell anyone where. "Mr. Kang," he said at the threshold. "Yes, for what it's worth." A pause so brief it almost didn't exist. "She deserves to know." Jae looked at the ceiling. "She'll know everything," he said. "When it's safe to tell her, she'll know everything." The door closed. Down the hall, Tae-jun laughed loudly at something on his phone, the laugh of a man counting money that wasn't his yet, rattling the walls of a house he would never own. Jae stared at the ceiling and thought about his wife, one wall away, quietly building the same case from the outside that he was building from the inside, both of them working toward the same conclusion, neither of them able to say a word about it. He almost smiled. He caught himself. His left eyebrow didn't move once. Nobody throws a premature victory celebration quite like a family that has confused the absence of resistance with the absence of capability. The Kangs were gifted at this. They had spent 11 months interpreting Mandy's composure as submission, her silence as surrender, and her patience as proof that she simply didn't understand the game being played around her. It was, genuinely, the most expensive misreading in the family's three-generation history. And nobody was misreading harder than Tae-jun. He arrived on a Wednesday morning with the energy of a man who had already written his own congratulatory press release. He was 31, sharper than he appeared, and had spent the better part of 2 years constructing a financial architecture designed to ensure that when the Kang Group's controlling interest eventually moved, it moved toward him. He wore his confidence like a second suit, well-fitted, expensive, impossible to take seriously once you understood it was covering something hollow underneath. He sat at Jay's bedside with a new folder and a smile that hadn't quite decided what it was hiding. "Just a few more signatures," he said, sliding the documents across with the practiced ease of someone who had done this enough times to stop feeling anything about it. Routine restructuring. The board wants everything clean before the next quarter. Jay looked at the papers with the cooperative blankness he had perfected across 3 weeks of performance. He reached for the pen. Down the hallway, Mandy was on a video call. She had timed it carefully. Mrs. O was at the market. Soo Yan wasn't due until the afternoon. The nursing team rotated at 11. She had exactly 40 minutes, and she was using all of them. The man on her screen was her older brother, Kofi Osei, 41, a corporate litigation attorney based in Atlanta, who had the broad shoulders of someone who had played college football and the precise, unhurried speech pattern of someone who had spent 15 years making opposing counsel regret underestimating him. He had disliked the Kang family on instinct from the first introduction and had been diplomatically pretending otherwise for Mandy's sake ever since, a performance he was visibly relieved to finally abandon. "Walk me through it again," he said. Mandy walked him through it again. The holding company registered 18 months before the wedding. The subsidiary re-registrations, the documents she'd glimpsed over Jay's shoulder, the asset reclassification filing she'd located through the public registry, the timeline which suggested the plan had been operational before Jay's accident, which meant the accident was not, as the family maintained, an unfortunate coincidence that had simply accelerated some necessary restructuring. Kofi was quiet for a moment. "Mandy, I know. They tried to kill your husband." "I know, Kofi. And you've been living in the house with them for 3 weeks. I've been gathering information." He rubbed his face with both hands, which was the closest Kofi Osei came to losing composure. "I need you to let me contact someone at the Seoul Financial Services Commission. What you're describing is securities fraud, wire fraud, attempted. Not yet. Mandy, not yet." Her voice was very calm. "Something is happening that I don't fully understand. Jay is..." She paused, choosing the word with the precision she applied to everything. "Performing." Kofi went still. "Explain." His left eyebrow. She almost smiled. "Jay has a tell. When he's hiding something, his left eyebrow stays completely flat. It's the overcorrection. He thinks keeping it still makes him look neutral, but it actually makes him look like a man trying extremely hard to look neutral, which is different." She paused. "It hasn't moved once since the accident. Not once in 3 weeks." A long silence. "You think he remembers everything," Kofi said. "I think he remembers everything, and he needs me to keep doing exactly what I'm doing without letting the family know that I know what I think I know." Kofi stared at her for a moment with the expression of a man reassessing a situation from its foundation. "That is either the most sophisticated thing I've ever heard," he said slowly, "or you are 29 weeks pregnant and catastrophically sleep-deprived. Those things aren't mutually exclusive." "Mandy, keep your contact at the FSC warm," she said. "Don't file anything. Don't call anyone. Give me 2 weeks." She looked directly into the camera. "If I'm wrong about Jay, we move immediately. If I'm right, we need to let whatever he's building finish before we touch it." Kofi looked at her for a long time. He had the expression of a man who wanted very badly to argue and understood completely that he would not win. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks. She ended the call. Sat for a moment in the quiet of the room. Outside, she could hear Tae-jun's voice drifting down the hallway. Upbeat, self-satisfied, explaining something to Jay with the enthusiasm of a man narrating his own coronation. She opened her notes app. She added 3 new entries. The timing of the filing. the specific clause Taijun had referenced in yesterday's document. A question she had been sitting with for 4 days. If Jay is running something, who is he running it with? She underlined it. Then she did something she hadn't allowed herself to do in 3 weeks. She pulled up a photograph on her phone, taken 8 months ago in Jeju, Jay asleep on a beach chair in sunglasses he'd borrowed from her because he'd forgotten his own, her hand resting on his arm. Both of them caught mid-laugh at something neither of them could remember afterward. The kind of photograph that looked like an accident and felt like a promise. She looked at it for exactly 30 seconds. Then she locked her phone, stood up, and went back to work. The 19th day arrived the way deadlines always do for people who aren't paying attention. Suddenly, and with consequences. For Jay, it arrived as a text from Park at 6 a.m. that read simply, complete. 2 syllables that represented 6 weeks of invisible architecture, 4 people's combined expertise, and the most legally airtight transfer of generational wealth ever executed from a hospital recovery bed. Jay read it twice, set his phone face down on the nightstand, and stared at the ceiling for a long moment with the particular stillness of a man who has been holding his breath underwater and has finally, quietly, found the surface. It was done. Every controlling share, every offshore account, every voting right, every subsidiary. Wrapped in legal instruments so precisely constructed that 3 jurisdictions would have to simultaneously agree to unwind them, which was approximately as likely as Taijun spontaneously developing a conscience. The entire Kang Group empire, the tech subsidiaries, the real estate towers, the shipping fleets, the buildings their family-funded galas inside of, now answered, in every way that mattered, to Mandiose Kang, who was currently in the kitchen, eating toast and pretending she didn't know. The board meeting was in 4 days. Jay had 1 performance left to give. Taejun arrived that afternoon with champagne he wasn't sharing yet and a satisfaction so large it had started leaking out around the edges of his professionalism. He sat at the dining table with Soo-yeon and their mother while Jay occupied the armchair in the living room with his customary blankness. And they spoke in the loose, unguarded way of people who have decided the dangerous person in the room is no longer dangerous. Baek confirmed the filing this morning, Taejun said, swirling his water glass as a rehearsal for the champagne. Everything transfers at the board meeting. All we need is the vote. We have the votes, Soo-yeon said. We have all the votes, he corrected, because Taejun was the kind of man who needed the superlative version of every victory. 7 board members. We only need 4. Father's proxy goes to me under the incapacitation clause. It's finished. Madame Kang set down her teacup with the delicate finality of a woman closing a chapter. And the wife? The word wife in her mouth had always carried the particular inflection of someone describing a structural defect. Baek is preparing a separation agreement, Taejun said. Given Jay's condition, we can petition for a conservatorship review within 60 days. She has no standing to contest the asset transfers because legally she was never listed as a primary stakeholder. He paused for the pleasure of it. She gets the apartment in Itaewon and a settlement, generous enough to avoid litigation, small enough to matter. Silence moved through the room like something dignified dying. Jay, from his armchair, blinked at the middle distance and said nothing. He was thinking about the apartment in Itaewon, a 2-bedroom place he'd bought before they married, which Mandy had once described as having the bones of a good space and the interior decisions of someone who had given up. He was thinking about Taejun's phrase, she has no standing, delivered with the casual authority of a man who had never once considered that standing, like foundations, could be built in places no one thought to look. He was thinking about Park's text, complete. He was thinking about 4 days, what Jay didn't know and what he would only learn afterward, sitting across from Mandy in the quiet aftermath of everything, was what happened in their bedroom at 9 o'clock that same evening. Mandy had been lying awake for an hour when her phone lit up. An unknown number, a sole area code she didn't recognize. She almost let it ring through, and then something, the instinct of a woman who had spent 6 weeks cataloging details that other people considered irrelevant, made her answer. The voice was female, older, careful. Mrs. Kang, my name is not important. What is important is that I work for your husband's auditor, and I have been asked to confirm one thing. A pause. Do you have access to a biometric reader at Seoul First National? Mandy sat up very slowly in the dark. Yes, she said. There is an account registered in your name established 6 weeks ago. The authorization was filed under a spousal protection instrument. It requires your fingerprint and a verbal confirmation to activate. Another pause, briefer. I was asked to tell you that when the time comes you will know what to do, and that the left eyebrow was always a terrible tell. The line went dead. Mandy sat in the dark bedroom for a very long time. Her daughter turned a slow circle inside her, unbothered. She thought about an eyebrow. She thought about a beach in Jeju. She thought about a man in a hospital bed looking through her like glass, his left eyebrow motionless, working very hard to look like someone with nothing to hide. She thought about the word complete, not because she'd seen the text, but because she recognized the feeling of it. The particular quality of a plan that has finished assembling itself and is now simply waiting for the moment to move. She understood structures. She understood load-bearing points. She understood that the most important thing a person could do when standing inside something that was about to fall was identify, in advance, exactly where they intended to land. She got up, got dressed, drove to Seoul First National, which had a 24-hour private banking suite for clients at a certain level of wealth, placed her thumb on the reader, and said the 2 words the instrument required. Then she drove home, made tea, went back to bed. 4 days. She could wait 4 days. She had, after all, been waiting for considerably longer than that. The night before the board meeting, the Kang family had dinner together for the first time in years without the specific tension that accompanies people who are competing for something. That tension had been replaced by something far more dangerous: comfort. They had arrived at the finish line in their minds, shaken hands with the outcome they wanted, and begun the quiet celebration of people who believe the hard part is behind them. It was, as victory laps go, extraordinarily premature. Madame Kang had the dining table set with the good porcelain, the ivory set with the gold rim that only appeared for occasions she considered significant. She had ordered food from the family's preferred restaurant in Gangnam, the kind of place where the portions were architectural and the prices were not listed because listing them would have been considered gauche. She wore her best jade earrings. She had, for the first time in 6 weeks, completely stopped pretending to be concerned about Jay's recovery, which was its own kind of confession to anyone paying attention. Taejun arrived with actual champagne this time, 2 bottles of something French and aggressively expensive, and set them on the table with the self-satisfied deliberateness of a man who had been waiting to make exactly this gesture for a very long time. He was dressed as though the dinner were a ceremony, because in his mind it was. The work was finished, the papers were filed, the votes were secured. Tomorrow was simply the formality of collecting what he had already decided was his. Soo-yeon arrived in her best suit and said very little, which was how she expressed contentment. She had spent 40 years as a judge watching people overreach and had concluded that the secret to lasting power was patience. She believed she had been patient. She had been patient for 11 months, watching Mandy occupy a position in this family that Soo-yeon had decided, upon first meeting her, was structurally unsound. Tomorrow would correct the structural problem. This satisfied her in the deep, architectural way that only the resolution of long-standing incorrectness can satisfy a woman of her particular temperament. Jay sat at the table and ate his dinner. Mandy had not been invited. She was in the bedroom on her tablet, reviewing a set of documents that Park Hyun-woo had couriered to the house that afternoon, inside a package labeled, with the kind of audacity that only a truly discreet man can pull off, physical therapy reference materials. She read through everything twice, made 3 notes, sent 2 messages. Then she put the tablet away, ate the dinner Mrs. O had left warming in the oven, jollof rice she had made herself that morning, because there were limits to what Mandy Osai would outsource, and went to sleep at 10 o'clock with the composure of someone who had checked every load-bearing point and found them all exactly where she'd left them. She slept extraordinarily well. This, too, would have alarmed the family had they known. But they didn't know, because they had spent 11 months deciding she was decorative, and decorative things don't typically require monitoring. At the dinner table, Taejun poured champagne into 4 glasses, 1 for himself, 1 for his mother, 1 for Soo-yeon, and 1 placed in front of Jay with the theatrical generosity of a man rewriting the narrative of their relationship in real time, casting himself as the reasonable brother who had simply done what was necessary. "To the family," he said, lifting his glass. "To the family," the women echoed. Jay lifted his glass, looked at it, set it down without drinking. Taejun frowned slightly. "Jay." "I'm sorry," Jay said, with the soft, slightly confused effect he had maintained for 6 weeks without a single crack. "I'm not sure I should drink. The doctors." "Of course," Taejun said smoothly, recovering. "Of course, we'll drink for you." He smiled the smile of a man who had already forgiven himself for everything. Tomorrow is going to be a new beginning, for all of us. "What happens tomorrow?" Jay asked, because he had found over 6 weeks that the most destabilizing thing he could do was ask the most obvious questions. A brief pause moved around the table. "A board meeting," Taejun said carefully. "Some restructuring. Routine things. You don't need to worry about any of it." "Will I be there?" "It's better if you rest." "Will Mandy be there?" The temperature in the room dropped approximately 3 degrees. "Mandy doesn't have standing at board meetings," Soo-yeon said with the precision of a woman who had been waiting to say those exact words in that exact order for quite some time. Jay nodded slowly, processing this with his carefully maintained blankness. I see, he said. He picked up his champagne glass, looked at it for a moment, set it back down. She's very capable, he said, to no one in particular, in the vague, disconnected tone of a man whose thoughts arrived slightly out of sequence. The woman in the bedroom. She seems very capable. Nobody responded. Madame Kang refilled her own glass. Taejun changed the subject to the Q3 projections with the practiced efficiency of a man who had spent his life steering conversations away from things that made him uncomfortable, which was a long and winding road. Jay ate his dinner. He thought about Park's confirmed timeline. He thought about Lim's completed audit. He thought about the two executives who would be seated in the boardroom tomorrow with USB drives and expressions of complete neutrality. He thought about every screen in that conference room lighting up simultaneously. He thought about Mandy, one floor above him, sleeping soundly. He almost picked up the champagne. He left it. There would be time for champagne tomorrow. Better champagne. Champagne that meant something. Taejun laughed at something Soo-yeon said and refilled his glass for the third time. Comfortable and expansive and completely, catastrophically unaware that the empire he was toasting had already changed hands. The ivory porcelain gleamed under the dining room lights. The good champagne breathed in its flutes. And somewhere in the careful accounting of everything that was about to happen, the Kang family's most expensive dinner came to its warm, oblivious, irreversible end. The Kang Group boardroom occupied the entire 42nd floor of a glass tower in central Seoul, the kind of room designed to make everyone inside it feel the precise weight of consequence. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a table long enough to host a small nation's cabinet, screens mounted along every wall that could display anything from quarterly projections to, as it turned out, 6 weeks of recorded conversations, fraudulent filings, and financial crimes committed by people who believed they were the smartest individuals in any room they entered. They were about to be corrected. 7 board members arrived at 9 a.m. and arranged themselves around the table with the practiced efficiency of people who believed they understood the agenda. The agenda, as distributed by Taejun's assistant the previous evening, listed 3 items: incapacitation review, asset restructuring confirmation, and leadership succession. Clean. Orderly. The paperwork of a conclusion already reached. Taejun arrived at 9:05 looking like a man dressed for a coronation, which he essentially was. He greeted the board members with handshakes calibrated to project confident humility, firm enough to suggest authority, warm enough to suggest he hadn't just spent 18 months engineering his brother's removal from his own company. He sat at the head of the table. He opened his folder. He allowed himself one small private exhale of satisfaction. Soo-yeon sat to his left. Madame Kang, who had no formal board position but had never once allowed that to limit her presence at significant family occasions, sat against the far wall in a chair that had been placed there at her instruction, wearing her jade earrings and the expression of a woman attending the reading of a will she had already memorized. The 2 independent executives, a man named Director Shin and a woman named Director Yu, both of whom had served the Kang Group for over 2 decades, and had watched the family with the long, quiet patience of people waiting for exactly this kind of morning, sat midway down the table with expressions of complete neutrality and USB drives in their jacket pockets. At 9:15, the door opened. Jay walked in. The room processed this information in stages. First came the surprise. He wasn't expected, wasn't on the agenda, had been described by Taejun to the board as still recovering, sending his proxy. Then came the recalibration. He was walking steadily, without assistance, wearing a suit that suggested he had not, in fact, spent the morning confused about his own identity. Then came the specific, creeping unease of people who were beginning to understand that the ground beneath them was not where they had left it. Taejun stood up. Jay. His voice was controlled, warm, and completely hollow. You should be resting. You don't need to be here. I know, Jay said pleasantly. That's what made it so useful. He sat down at the other end of the table, a beat of silence. Then Mandy walked in. She wore a structured charcoal dress, her natural hair pinned back, a leather portfolio under one arm, and the particular expression of a woman who has been underestimated for 11 months and has made extraordinarily productive use of the time. She was 32 weeks pregnant and moved with the unhurried authority of someone who owned the floor she was walking on, which, as of 6 days ago, she effectively did. Madame Kang's teacup, which she had carried in from the reception area, made a small sound against its saucer. Soo-yeon's hands stilled on the table. Taejun looked between his brother and his brother's wife with the rapid, increasingly alarmed calculation of a man running numbers that were not adding up. This is a board meeting, he said. She doesn't have standing. She has majority standing, Jay said. As of 6 days ago, Mandy Ose Kang holds controlling interest in the Kang Group through a protected spousal trust, a consolidated offshore instrument, and voting rights that are locked under 3 jurisdictions. He paused. She is, technically, the only person in this room who can adjourn the meeting. I'd recommend not suggesting she leave again. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a room full of intelligent people, simultaneously revising everything they thought they knew. Director Shin and Director Yu reached into their jacket pockets. The screens came alive. Every wall of the boardroom filled simultaneously. Recordings, documents, financial forensics laid out with the quiet devastation of evidence assembled by people who had taken their time and gotten everything right. Taijun's voice filled the room from 6 different speakers, discussing brake fluid with a logistics manager. Su-Yan's handwriting appeared on backdated board resolutions, a legal opinion commissioned in secret, an email chain with a 3-word subject line that had been printed, locked in a safe, and carried through 6 weeks of the most controlled performance in Jae Kang's life. The room did not move. Taejin's folder sat open in front of him, suddenly and completely useless, a prop in a play whose script had been rewritten without his knowledge. Jae stood. He looked at his family the way Mandy looked at structures, not at the surface, but at what the surface had been hiding, and at what happened to things built on foundations that were never as solid as they appeared. I never lost my memory, he said. Not for a single day, not for a single hour. He let that land. I lost my patience. Those are different things. His mother said nothing. For the first time in Jae's memory, Madame Kang had nothing to perform. The jade earrings caught the light. Her face was very still. Taijun opened his mouth. The filing you submitted yesterday, Park Hyun-woo said from the doorway. He had arrived, of course, at the precise moment required, because Park operated on a schedule that appeared effortless and was in fact military. Constitutes fraudulent asset reclassification under the signature of a person you yourselves argued was legally incapacitated, which means you either committed fraud or you didn't believe he was incapacitated, in which case the incapacitation clause that transfers his proxy to you is void. He set a document on the table in front of Taijun, with the gentle finality of a man who has been waiting a long time to put something down. I'd recommend speaking to an attorney, not Mr. Beck. Mr. Beck has his own situation to manage this morning. Taijun sat down. He did not get back up. At the far end of the table, Mandy opened her portfolio. She reviewed the first page with the focused calm of someone beginning a workday, which is exactly what this was. She asked Director Shin a question about the subsidiary re-registration timeline. He answered. She made a note. She asked Director Yu about the offshore consolidation audit. Yu answered. She made another note. The board watched her work. Slowly, one by one, they understood what they were looking at. Not the wife who had been managed and maneuvered and smiled at in Korean for 11 months, but the majority owner of the company they served, conducting her first morning as the person this empire now answered to. Jae watched her from across the long table. He thought about Singapore, a conference room not entirely unlike this one, except she had been presenting and he had been pretending to take notes while actually watching her talk about earthquake-resistant architecture with the kind of fluency that made everything around her seem slightly less solid. He had thought then, that woman understands exactly how things fall. I would very much like to not be something that falls.